Maybe can I discuss heart attack a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, because that's a pretty big one. Okay, so this is amazing. So looking at, okay, well, actually one of the possible questions that you were going to ask, and I'll just ask it of myself here. Why does Dr. Hάμερ use the terminology cancer equivalents to describe other diseases besides cancer? How does he explain heart attacks and strokes, for instance? And so Dr. Hάμερ, again, he says cancer equivalent because he says, hey, really, there's not a whole lot of difference in the basic principles of the navigation of healing between a cold or a cancer. It's a similar principle. And so, but let's take two biggies out there that a lot of people probably know somebody that's had heart attacks and strokes. So let's look at the conventional notion of what a heart attack is. The conventional notion says that a heart attack, due to various risk factors, including high cholesterol, high blood pressure, lack of exercise, and I'm sure these can play a role to a degree. But here's what I find when I sit down with somebody that had a heart attack and I actually ask them, this is what I find. So Dr. Hάμερ says, here's the deal, that the individual preceding the heart attack was doing just fine, and then one day they got in the midst of a conflict. The flavor of this conflict, the tonality is territorial loss. And territorial loss can be, well, a territory could be a family member, it could be my home, it could be my bank account, it could be my car, it could be they want to remove a testicle, and so any of these could be a territorial loss. Or you could think of a Paleolithic terms, thinking in animal terms too, of a deer, thinking of a stag, a majestic stag, and rut is coming up. Certainly, this stag is going to be challenged by the young bucks, and there's going to be some fighting. It lasts generally about 2 weeks, and so that stag will go into that conflict, especially if he's kicked out. And what happens is when you experience this in the first phase, the brain says, you're going to need to resist. You're going to need to get ready for a fight, and I need to help you. So you need to have your coronary artery reamed out and made larger, the inner diameter, so that you can get more myocardial perfusion. You get more blood going into that myocardium so you can fight, so you can be stronger. And so this does happen. And then when we resolve the conflict, it must be restored. So after the resolution of the conflict, generally the animal or human will experience a precipitous rise in the cholesterol because we need to spackle all of these cracks and nooks and crannies closed, but also recognize that something I haven't talked about is this concept of epileptoid crisis and in the second phase, and this is quite important, especially in light of the heart attack or stroke. And that is that in the repair phase, now we have to reconstitute that artery. When we go through the conflictolysis, at that moment the brain ceases the ulceration within the coronary artery and it begins to fill it in. However, in the midst of filling it in, and it can be days or up to 6 weeks later, that one will experience a kind of a fulminant, quick, a large edema locally in the coronary artery, but also always and in parallel in the brain. And the part of the brain, and you can look at your 23-page PDF document there, it actually has these maps, but the part of the brain that controls for this coronary artery is over the right ear. That is very important for people to remember that, and practitioners to remember that. That doesn't mean you can't do your CPR or your ACLS or whatever, but what we need to do is get a bag of ice or get an ice cube over that right ear to help with that edema. Because, so the traditional view of a heart attack is that an atherosclerotic plaque breaks off for no apparent reason, just on that particular day, it breaks off and it goes downstream, and like a cork, it plugs up the coronary artery. Depending on how far downstream it goes, it will determine how much damage is in the myocardium. And we know that there are two rhythm controllers in the heart and the myocardium, the SA node and the AV node. But Hάμmer teaches us there is yet another rhythm controller, amazingly enough, up in the brain. And it's right in the area right next to and adjacent to the coronary artery relay. And so when there's this swelling in this epileptic crisis, it pushes on this rhythm controller, and it can actually stop the heart. And there have been cases where people place a bag of ice over the right ear, and they're immediately taken out of an arrhythmia. And we had one of our nurses who works in the emergency room say she's done this a couple times, and it's remarkable how easy and quickly they're able to convert patients with all of the standard therapies just with the bag of ice.